The stars hung cold and quiet above the dark void where ships once passed in peace. But now the air between worlds was filled with tension and fear, and no one dared to speak of the humans without lowering their voice, because the humans were no longer what they once were. Long ago they had joined the Galactic Council with open hands and open hearts, and they believed that joining would bring safety and progress and respect. But what they found instead was humiliation and betrayal. Humans had worked hard to prove their worth, building colonies on harsh worlds, sharing their science and defending borders that were not their own. But every time they rose a little higher, someone in the council pushed them down with soft smiles and sharper words. The alien races called them children of chaos, saying they were too emotional, too wild, too dangerous to be trusted with power. And so when the council decided to tax the human colonies into poverty and send soldiers to control trade routes, the humans stayed quiet and endured because they still believed in peace, because they thought the council was wise. But the day came when the council broke their last hope on Mars colony, when pirates from a race called the Drawl attacked a settlement full of families. And the council turned their eyes away, saying it was a local issue and not their concern. Millions of humans died, and the survivors sent messages begging for help, and no one came. Then the humans realized that no one ever would. Commander Ethan Brooks was there on that day. His ship, the Vanguard, orbited Mars, and he could see the burning domes from orbit. His hands shook as he heard the screams through the radio, but the council's signal ordered him to stand down to observe and not interfere. He obeyed because that was the law, and afterward he hated himself for it. When he returned to Earth, he found the same rage in every cities full of grief, united under one thought. Never again. The governments of Earth stopped sending envoys. They stopped answering council requests. They began to build in silence. New ships, new weapons, new alliances. And when the council demanded to inspect the growing fleets, Earth simply said no. Months passed, then years, and humanity spread further. But this time they did not share their secrets. The aliens watched with unease but dismissed the humans as dreamers who could never challenge the grand fleets of the council. Yet the day came when the humans returned. Not with words, but with fire. Commander Ethan Brooks stood again on the bridge of the Vanguard, years older now, but his eyes burned with the same cold fury he had felt that day over Mars. He looked at the fleet around him, 1,000 ships, strong, each one a symbol of the rage of his people. And he thought of all the faces he had lost. The council had sent a warning message declaring human fleets illegal and demanding surrender, and Ethan had read it once, then deleted it. He knew there was no going back. This war was not about conquest, it was about memory. When the first human fleet entered council space, they were met with disbelief. The aliens thought it was a raid. But when the first planet fell in a single night, they understood humans did not fight. Like others, they fought like the universe had taken everything from them, and they were here to take it back. The council met in emergency session in the Great Hall of Glass, where once they had welcomed humanity as new friends. Now their voices were filled with panic. Some shouted that humans must be stopped. Others begged for diplomacy. A few even wept, saying they had seen what humans did to the Drawl homeworld, and it was beyond imagination the humans had given the Drawl a chance to surrender. The Drawl had laughed and sent threats. A day later, their world was silent. The council decided to send envoys to Earth to beg for peace, but none returned. The envoys' ships were found drifting in the dark, their communications cut, and no one knew what had been said. Ethan Brooks had been the one to meet them. He listened to their message of peace, and he said nothing. He only turned and walked away, leaving them in silence now as his fleet approached the council's capital world. The alien leaders sent another desperate message, promising forgiveness, offering seats of power, offering wealth and safety. But no one on the human side answered. The bridge of the Vanguard was quiet. Only the hum of engines filled the air. Ethan stood before the viewing screen, watching the planet grow larger. His second officer, Laura Dean, looked at him and asked softly if there was still time to turn back. He shook his head and said, "We turned back once on Mars, never again." The words were simple, but everyone on the ship understood what they meant. The order was given and the fleet moved forward. The skies above the capital world filled with human ships, dark and silent like a storm waiting to break. The council began broadcasting pleas across Every channel begging for mercy, saying they were willing to surrender, saying they were sorry for everything, and still no one answered. The first shot came from a single human cruiser, and in minutes the entire sky burned. The alien defense fleet fell apart faster than anyone believed possible. Their ships were larger and brighter, but they lacked the will. The humans had. They fought not for glory, but for ghosts, and that made them unstoppable. When the battle was done, the capital city lay in ruins. Fire reflected off the oceans like dying stars. Ethan watched in silence. No victory speeches, no joy, only the weight of what they had done. He thought of the families on Mars, of the voices that would never speak again. And he knew that no apology would ever be enough. The Galactic Council had pleaded for peace, but humanity was done listening. They had listened once, they had believed once, and now the silence of the stars was their only answer. The fires on the Council world still glowed when the human fleet turned away, leaving behind silence and ash. Commander Ethan Brooks watched from the bridge of the Vanguard as the light faded in the distance. The crew spoke little, their faces empty. Of triumph, they had done what they came for, but victory had no warmth. The Council's capital was gone, but the Council itself was not dead. Scattered governments still held power across many systems, and now every one of them feared the humans. Like no one had before. For years they had called humans emotional and reckless. Now they saw what that emotion truly meant. Ethan returned to Earth, carrying with him the weight of a galaxy's fear. When he landed, crowds filled the ports, cheering, his name, calling him a hero, but he could not feel pride. The faces of Mars still haunted his dreams. He met with the leaders of the new human alliance, who asked him to continue the campaign until no enemy remained. Ethan agreed, not because he wanted war, but because he knew peace would not last if the Council survived somewhere far from Earth on a world called Velran. An alien commander named Rethar stood before a table of shattered officers. Their fleets had been crushed, their supply lines gone. They listened to desperate reports saying the humans were advancing faster than any calculation could predict. Rethar had once fought beside human soldiers. He had seen them laugh and fight and die with courage, and now he could not understand what drove them to such fury. Some of his officers said they were monsters that no mind could reason with. Others said they were ghosts, returned for vengeance. Rethar knew better. He knew the humans had been wronged, and he knew this war would not stop until justice was done. He sent a secret message to the remaining Council members telling them to surrender, but they refused. They said the humans must be stopped, or the entire order of the galaxy would fall, and Rethar thought quietly that maybe it deserved to fall on Earth. Ethan met with Captain Laura Dean, who had fought beside him since the first strike. She told him of alien worlds that now raised human flags. She told him of captured civilians and soldiers who spoke of mercy and help, but no one trusted it. The humans gave food to the starving and rebuilt cities, but those they helped still trembled. In fear, Ethan understood it. He did not blame them. Once humans had been at the bottom of that fear. The new fleets grew, larger and stronger. Their ships no longer carried names of hope like Unity or Dawn. Now they bore names like Vengeance and Silence. They moved through the stars like shadows, leaving behind nothing but whispers. When the Council tried to form new alliances, the smaller species refused to fight, saying they would rather surrender than face the humans again. It became clear that this was no longer a war between nations. It was a reckoning across the galaxy. A punishment written in fire. Ethan knew it, and yet deep inside he wondered what would happen when there was nothing left to fight for. Laura noticed the change in him. She saw how he stared at the stars with empty eyes. One night she asked if he thought the Council deserved mercy. He did not answer. She told him that if they kept going, there would be no one left to speak to. He said softly that silence was better than betrayal, and she said nothing more. The next campaign began with the invasion of Velran, the last stronghold of the Council's defense. Rethar stood at the edge of his command center, watching human ships darken the sky. His officers screamed orders, but he knew it was hopeless. The humans fought with perfect coordination. They used every weakness they had, learned from years of being underestimated. Their weapons struck faster than light, and their soldiers landed in waves that moved like one mind. Rathar watched his people fall, and he ordered the evacuation of civilians knowing it would not matter. He remembered the human officer he once fought beside a man named Carter, who had said once that humans were dangerous only when they were ignored. Now he understood what those words had meant as the last defense line broke. Rathar sent a message. Directly to Ethan Brooks, he spoke calmly, saying that he would surrender his world if the humans promised to spare the innocent. There was no answer for hours. Then finally a single transmission came through. Ethan's voice was quiet and heavy. Said civilians would be safe, that the humans would not harm those who did not fight. Rathar closed his eyes in relief and gave the order to stand down when the Vanguard entered orbit above Velrun. The world was already silent. No guns, no resistance. Only the sound of wind over ruined towers. Ethan looked down and felt nothing. He did not celebrate. He simply watched as teams landed to secure the planet. Laura approached him and asked if this was what victory looked like. He said maybe, but it does not feel like it, she said. Maybe nothing ever will. They stood in silence as the last fires burned out below them across the galaxy. The Council's members hid in forgotten systems, sending out messages that no one answered they had created. The fear that now consumed them and humanity had become the storm they once warned others about. And yet among the humans, there were those who began to ask questions. Scientists, teachers, and young officers started to wonder if the path they were on would ever end. Some whispered that the Council's peace offer should have been accepted, that maybe there was another way, but no one dared to speak too loudly. Ethan knew about these whispers, and he did not silence them, but he did not encourage them either. He was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders. His orders were clear: end the war, leave no power that could threaten Earth ever again, and he would obey until his last breath on the quiet bridge of the Vanguard. He looked at the stars and thought of Mars, and he knew that even if peace ever came, it would never be the same, for humanity had changed forever. They had looked into the face of betrayal and answered it with fire, and now the galaxy would remember that answer for all time. The war stretched on through cold years and endless skies, and the stars that once brought wonder now carried only the memory of fire. The humans had become a force that moved like a tide, unstoppable and silent. They did not conquer for wealth, they did not rule for pride, they moved because stopping meant remembering what they had lost. Commander Ethan Brooks sat alone in his quarters, staring at the old photograph of his family. A wife and 2 children who had died on Mars when the colony burned. He had told himself long ago that every battle he fought was for them. But now when he looked at their faces, he could not tell if he was still fighting for justice or only revenge. He left the picture on the table and returned to the bridge. The crew stood at attention, their eyes hollow but their discipline perfect. The ship Vanguard led the fleet toward the outer rim worlds, where the last Council fleets were said to be hiding. Intelligence reports said they were gathering strength for one last stand, but Ethan knew better. They were only gathering courage to die. Captain Laura Dean approached with a data pad showing the new orders. The High Command wanted all fleets to converge and strike at once to end the war in a single move. She asked him if he thought it would work. He said it would end something, whether it was the war or them he could not tell. Far from the front lines, small human colonies tried to rebuild, but even there the shadow of war followed the people. They grew crops under dome roofs but still listened for the distant thunder of ships passing overhead. Children learned the names of alien worlds before they learned the names of stars, because every world had become a battlefield. In the city of New Denver on Earth, statues of fallen soldiers stood in silent rows. The people left flowers, but no one prayed because they no longer believed anyone was listening. The Council worlds, meanwhile, fell deeper into chaos without their fleets and leaders. The smaller races fought among themselves. Some surrendered to human patrols. Others destroyed their own cities to avoid occupation. In the ruins of one such city, a young alien girl named Kira searched for her family. She had lost them when the bombardment began. She hid in tunnels and waited for silence. When she came out, she saw human soldiers walking through the ash. They carried food and medicine, but their faces were hard. She ran from them, afraid. One soldier named Daniel saw her and followed. She thought he would kill her, but instead he gave her water and told her she was safe. She did not believe him at first, but when he smiled, she saw no hate in his eyes. Daniel was one of the few who still remembered why the humans had fought. He believed mercy was strength, not weakness, when he reported the child's rescue to his commander. The answer came cold. We are not here to save them. We are here to finish this. Daniel said nothing, but his heart grew heavy. He began to see that victory had become a prison that none could escape. Ethan received reports like this often, but he ignored them. Not because he did not care, but because caring hurt too much every time he thought of mercy. He saw fire. He saw Mars. And he saw the faces that never stopped screaming when the fleet finally reached the outer rim. The last Council stronghold came into view. A world called Illyria. A blue world covered in oceans and clouds. The Council remnants had gathered there, their ships forming a wall around, the planet waiting for the final battle. Ethan stood before his crew and said, "We end it here. No speeches, no cheers, just orders." He gave the signal, and the human fleet moved in silence. Thousands of ships forming a black wave across the stars. The battle began without warning. Missiles streaked between fleets, lasers burned through darkness, and ships exploded like dying suns. The Council fought bravely, but they were broken from years of running. They had no unity, no hope, only fear. The humans moved with calm precision, each order executed with perfect timing. It was not war, it was math, and the outcome was already written. Laura stood beside Ethan watching the battle unfold. She whispered that it felt wrong, that it felt too easy. Ethan said nothing. The battle lasted 6 hours, and when it ended, Illyria's skies were dark with smoke. Human ships orbited the ruins, scanning for survivors. The last message from the Council came from a small station above the planet. It was an old alien, named Harvek, who had once been one of the voices that voted against helping Mars. He appeared on the screen, weak and tired, his voice shaking. He said, "You have won, humans. The Council is gone. There is nothing left to fight for. Please stop now, you. Have your vengeance. Do not lose your soul." Ethan listened but gave no reply. Harvek's eyes filled with tears as he said, "We were wrong about you. We thought you were dangerous because of your rage, but it was your heart that we feared most, because we never had one like it before." The transmission ended and the station went silent. Ethan looked out at the burning planet below and whispered to himself that maybe Harvek was right. Maybe it had been the heart that made humans what they were, and maybe it was that same heart that would destroy them when the fleet left Illyria. There were no enemies left to fight. The Council's territories were gone, and the galaxy lay quiet for the first time in years. Yet peace did not come. It hung over them like a ghost waiting to be named. The soldiers returned home to worlds that no longer felt like home. They looked at the stars and saw not wonder but guilt. Daniel returned to Earth and found that people spoke of glory and victory, but when he told them what he had seen, they turned away. They did not want to hear of mercy or sorrow. They wanted stories of power and pride. And so he stopped speaking and joined the silence that grew between all of them. Ethan met with the leaders once. More, they called him a savior, a guardian of humankind. They offered him medals and monuments, but he refused. He told them the war was not over because wars like this never end. They only sleep until someone wakes them again. Then he left the meeting and stood by the window watching the night sky over Earth. It was beautiful but empty. He thought of all the worlds that would never see peace again, and wondered if any of it had been worth it. Humanity had finally silenced the galaxy. But in that silence there was no joy, only the echo of everything they had lost. The stars were quiet after the last battle, and silence spread through the systems once filled with fire. Humanity had won, but no one felt like victors. The fleets returned to their worlds, but the skies no longer seemed safe. They had destroyed every enemy they knew, yet they could not destroy the memory of what they had done. Commander Ethan Brooks sat in his quarters aboard the Vanguard, now orbiting Earth. The ship was no longer needed, but he refused to leave it. The walls of metal felt more honest than the halls of power waiting below. He spent hours looking out the window at the blue planet he had fought to protect. It looked peaceful from space, untouched and beautiful. But he knew peace was only a word now. Captain Laura Dean visited him, often trying to speak about rebuilding, but he rarely answered. She had become one of the few people who could face him without fear. She brought reports from the colonies, new trade routes, new governments rising in the ruins of the Council. Yet, all she saw in his eyes was the same emptiness. She asked once if he believed the war had made them better. He told her war never makes anyone better. It only shows what they always were. And she said softly, "Then maybe this is what we were always meant to be." He said nothing because he could not argue with her below on Earth. People celebrated in the streets, banners flew, and songs were written. Children played games pretending to be soldiers who had fought the council. But those who had really fought stayed silent. They knew what those children could never understand. They knew that victory came with a cost that would never fade in one of the outer colonies. A group of human engineers worked with alien refugees rebuilding cities. The aliens watched the humans with a mix of awe and fear. They helped but never forgot what had happened when the humans first came. Some humans tried to show kindness. They shared food and medicine. They rebuilt schools and roads, but the ghosts of war walked. With them, no amount of help could erase the fire from memory. One of the refugees, a young alien named Kira, the same child Daniel had saved years ago, grew up among humans. She learned their language, their customs, and their pain. She often asked Daniel why the humans had destroyed so much if they only wanted peace. Daniel never had an answer. He told her only that sometimes peace must be fought for, and she would shake her head and say, "Then peace is never peace at all." Daniel carried that thought with him for years. It echoed in his mind every night when he dreamed of burning skies. He began to believe the girl was right on Earth. The leaders of the Human Alliance met in secret halls. They spoke of expanding their rule. They said the galaxy was fragile and needed order. They called it peacekeeping, but everyone knew it was control. They wanted no more surprises, no more enemies to rise again. They ordered new fleets built even larger than before, not for defense, but for fear of the unknown. Ethan was asked to lead the new command, but he refused. He said he was done with wars. They told him he had no choice, that his name inspired obedience. He turned and left without another word. He walked through the city streets for the first time in years, seeing faces smiling beneath lights and flags, and he felt like a stranger among his own people. He passed a wall covered in names of the fallen, and he stopped to find his family's names there. He touched the letters carved in stone and felt the years fall away, the anger, the vengeance, the pride, all of it felt small against the weight of their memory. A young officer saw him and saluted, calling him the hero of Earth. Ethan only nodded and walked away. He knew he was no hero. He was a survivor, and that was all far away on a distant world. Laura commanded the reconstruction teams. She oversaw the rebuilding of alien cities. She believed that maybe they could still make something good from the ashes. One night she received a message from Ethan. It was only a few words. He wrote, "Do you think they will ever forgive us?" She stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "I don't think forgiveness is what we should look for. Maybe we should learn to forgive ourselves." He never answered, and she never sent another message. Months passed. The new fleets grew stronger. Patrols moved farther into the dark edges of the galaxy, searching for threats and finding none, until one day they found something strange. A signal coming from deep space, not from any known race. It was old and faint and repeated a single phrase, "We are coming home." Scientists studied it. Soldiers whispered about it. Rumors spread, saying it was another human fleet lost long ago. Returning others said it was something else, something older. Ethan heard about it, and for the first time in years felt something stir inside him. Curiosity, or maybe fear. He requested to see the signal himself. The analysts showed him the pattern, and he recognized something. In it, the structure of human code, but twisted like it had evolved on its own. He asked where it was coming from. They said beyond the rim, beyond any charted star. No one knew what it meant. The council was gone. The galaxy was silent. And yet something out there still called itself home. Ethan returned to the Vanguard one last time and looked at the empty bridge. Dust had settled on the controls, but it still felt alive. He thought of the signal repeating in the dark, and wondered if maybe the war had not ended at all. Maybe it had only changed its shape. He sat in the captain's chair and watched the stars through the glass, and for a moment he thought he saw movement far away, like shadows drifting between the stars. He closed his eyes and felt the hum of the ship, like a heartbeat, faint but real. He whispered to himself that humanity had done what it had to do, that they had survived. But somewhere deep down he knew survival was not the same as living, and as the stars burned silently, beyond the window the signal echoed again, faint but clear. "We are coming home." The message kept repeating across the cold dark of space, "We are coming home," and no one knew what it meant. The Human Alliance gathered their best minds to study it. Some thought it was a trick, some thought it was a ghost. From the old wars, others believed it was a warning. But Commander Ethan Brooks did not believe in ghosts. He believed in consequences. He stood on the empty bridge of the Vanguard, listening to the faint echo of the signal it came from, beyond the rim, from a place no one had explored since before the Council Wars. The coordinates pointed toward an old colony, thought to be lost during the first expansion. It had been forgotten in the chaos of history. Now it called out like a voice from the past, the Alliance High. Command ordered an investigation, and they wanted Ethan to lead it. At first he refused, but when he heard the message again, repeating the same simple phrase, something inside him told him he had to go. He assembled a small crew, volunteers only. Among them was Captain Laura Dean, who had left her post to join him one last time, and Daniel, the soldier who once saved the alien child. They boarded the Vanguard, refitted for the long journey, and left orbit in silence as the ship drifted away from Earth. The blue planet grew smaller behind them. Laura watched it fade and said, "It looks peaceful from here." Ethan replied, "It always looks peaceful from a distance, but you only see the scars when you are close." They entered deep space. The stars around them thinning until the blackness seemed endless. The crew worked quietly, listening to the signal grow stronger every day. Daniel asked once, "What if it is not human? What if it is something else?" Ethan said, "Then we will face it like everything else." Laura said, "Maybe it is us. Maybe it is the part of us we lost." The words stayed in his mind the further they went. The stranger. Things became systems, flickered lights, dimmed. Voices whispered through the comms, repeating the message with different tones. Sometimes it sounded like his children, sometimes like his own voice. One night Laura came to the bridge and said she saw lights moving outside, but when they looked there was nothing, only the endless dark. Then one day the signal stopped. They reached the coordinates and found a planet floating alone, its surface gray and cracked. No cities, no lights, no signs of life. The sensors picked up traces of old human structures buried beneath the dust. The planet had once been called Horizon 1. Of the first colonies lost during the early wars, Ethan ordered the ship to descend. The air was thin and cold. They landed near what had once been a settlement. The wind howled through empty towers. The team stepped out, wearing suits, moving through the ruins. They found signs of old battles, burned walls, and broken machines. Daniel found an old human flag half buried in the dust and held it up, saying, "We were here once." Ethan nodded but said nothing. They reached an underground complex sealed. For centuries they forced it open, and inside they found light still glowing faintly. After all this time the air smelled dry and old. They followed the tunnels deeper until they reached a large chamber filled with strange machines. And in the center, a single beacon still pulsing with faint blue light. The source of the signal. Laura touched the console and the beacon flared to life, filling the room with soft light. A voice spoke, not alien, but human, calm and tired. It said, "If you are hearing this, then humanity has survived. We built this place as a message to the future. We wanted you to remember who we were before the war, before the hate. We wanted you to remember why we began among the stars." Ethan froze. The voice was familiar. It was the voice of his old teacher, the man who had helped design the first generation of ships before the Council years. The message continued. "We believed in peace, but peace without strength is an illusion. We believed in strength, but strength without compassion is death. If you have come this far, then maybe you can still choose between them." The light flickered and the message repeated. Ethan stood silent, staring at the beacon. Laura said softly, "Maybe this is what we needed. A reminder that we're not always like this." Daniel knelt beside the console and said, "Maybe this is what home really means. Not planets, not power, just memory." Ethan touched the metal surface. It was warm like a heartbeat. He realized then that humanity had built this message long before the wars. Maybe they knew this day would come, the day they would forget why they had fought. The beacon stopped pulsing and the silence felt heavy. Ethan looked around at the faces of his crew, tired faces that had seen too much. He said we will rebuild this place not as a fortress but as a memorial. So no one ever forgets again. They spent days repairing the systems, cleaning the halls, raising a flag at the entrance. Not as a mark of conquest but as a promise to remember. When they left Horizon, the signal began again, but this time it said something new. We are home. As the Vanguard lifted off the ground, Ethan felt a strange peace for the first time in years. He looked at Laura and said, "Maybe now we can start over." She smiled faintly and said, "Maybe we already have." Daniel stood by the window watching the planet shrink behind them, and whispered that maybe forgiveness was not something you waited for. Maybe it was something you built. As they crossed the rim, back toward human space, the stars ahead seemed brighter. The galaxy was still scarred, still fearful, still quiet. But somewhere within that silence, a new beginning waited. Humanity had burned the old order to ashes. But from those ashes, something different began to grow. The galaxy had pleaded for peace, and in the end, peace came not from surrender but from remembering who they had once been. Ethan sat in his chair on the bridge, listening to the steady hum of the ship, the same sound that had carried him through years of war, and for the first time it sounded like home. And as the Vanguard sailed through the starlight, the signal faded behind them, leaving only silence and the promise of a future that would not repeat the past.